All right, thank you everybody for joining. I'm Brian Hutchison, VP of Solutions Architecture here at Loom Security, and this is Chris Vermilia, the VP of our services group here at Loom Security. And what we want to do is we want to continue our discussion about Marketing Mary. To recap, we had a video blog number 1, which talked about our methodology here at Loom Security and our services approach towards the journey of our user-centric approach, which to me is very flexible, or, depending on the outcome that you're looking for, whether it's data security, application security posture, it's network segmentation, SASE decisions, or zero trust decisions. We feel like our approach or our methodology, our user-centric methodology is key to making those decisions. And in the first session, we talked about personas and identities, understanding who is connecting to your network, and being able to understand what their role is and what their identity is to me the foundation. I know, Chris, you, as an identity specialist yourself, you can weigh in a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that Loom Lens approach that you're talking through that we introduced last time is foundational to how we view security, right? And it's just an approach that we've continued to refine, over the last couple of months as we've gone through this, and a message is landing really well with our customers in terms of taking that identity-centric lens and applying it to a lot of different things, application security, data security, network security, the list goes on and on. And it's not just because I'm an identity guru, like you said, Hutch, it's certainly near and dear to my heart, but I think it is core and it's central to how we can manage access and posture as we move forward. So, initially we took a look at Marketing Mary last time and her initial contact, right? First contact as she got moving in the morning, connecting to email and things like that on her mobile device. Today we want to move into the next phases of her day as she moves forward, right? Like most of us, as she gets moving in the morning and kind of gets that coffee and gets running, eventually she's going to sit down at her laptop, right? Whether it's a corporate laptop, whether it's her personal laptop, a lot of different connectivity postures that go through that. And so we want to take some time to talk through that. So phase 2 here, part 2, we're kind of calling that morning rush, right? And if you're okay, Hutch, I'm going to kind of keep giving from the introductory perspective. What does that look like? Right? Mary sits down, right? She's got her coffee, she's pumping, she's grooving, she knows what her day is going to look like. She's really kind of getting into gear. So she's fired up that machine. Let's take the corporate approach first, right? She's on that corporate laptop. That posture is managed by the organization, right? Assuming that device is checking in regularly, it's getting updates from an operating system perspective, from an antivirus perspective, from a firewall perspective. There's lots of things that we do these days to manage our corporate devices, and they're good things, right? It's on purpose. And from Mary's perspective, if all that's working appropriately, doesn't know the difference, right? She gets a reboot prompt, hopefully not during the day. We know sometimes those aren't always well timed, but she gets that reboot prompt, and otherwise she's firing away. Behind the scenes, right? Take through Mary's lens into the background here. We know that we're looking at that device for a heck of a lot more, right? We want to make sure it's patched. We want to make sure we know where it's coming from. We can talk about network security in there as well. But regardless, at the end of the day, we're making access decisions on where she can go. Right? So some applications within the network may need full network connectivity, be that through a VPN client, be that through some sort of split tunnel. There's options there, and we don't need to go too deep into those. But either way, that plays into this posture decision as well. And so we help Mary get to where she needs to go based on what we know about her as the identity. Again, we talked about that last time. Today, more about the device and the network piece. So Hutch, kind of kick it back over to you. From your perspective, what are some of those pieces we look at, and why are they important?
Yeah, good question. Well, when you talk, first of all, when you start talking about the device posture itself, one of the things or one of the challenges that we see and help customers with is understanding what those device or posture controls are. When you start to think through like what's acceptable, what isn't, from a risk management perspective, like, is that machine inventoried? Is that machine or does that host have software updates? Is it up to date? Does that machine have, like you talked about, those perimeter security tools or that endpoint tools, if you will? And that's all good. And you can say that, from a theory, but having those, those minimum security standards documented and defined, it's a lot of times it's regulatory, but as well, from your controls, your internal program controls, it's good to have that documented as well. So when we start talking about Mary, or whoever those personas are in your environment that you've identified, we're looking at those workstations or those laptops in order for her to have the proper control, or proper, access to the things that she needs to be, to be productive. As she's starting to fire up and begin to be very productive, we need to make sure that we have the right scrutiny around that device. And then once we've identified all of those components, we start to wonder or put scrutiny or security around how she's actually connecting to the applications that she needs access to be productive.
That's a good point. And kind of on that note, I'm going to dig a little bit further. Let's say Mary's, she's not at home, right? She's not at her typical IP location. She's not in an area that we can designate from call it like a user behavior detection. She's at a coffee shop, right? She's sitting at Starbucks, or she's at the airport. She's traveling today. What's different about that kind of approach, and how do we know it's different? And then I'll come back to the user lens side of that as well.
Well, the thing about that is it shouldn't be different from Mary. I mean, if we're doing our job, if she opens and connects to, hotel Wi-Fi or something, she shouldn't have to struggle to connect to those productivity apps, because if she does, then, we're failing. Honestly, number one, she's not productive, and via her persona that we've identified that she's one of the individuals in the company that provides a ton of value monetarily or whatever, that's problematic. So, if she's on-prem, obviously we're probably not, we're still concerned, but we're not overly, freaked out, I guess, if her controls aren't up to date and those types of things, because we have those perimeter controls in place that kind of keep the guardrails, or the doors, if you will. If she's on a hotel IP, it's way more important to me, because we don't know what else is on that IP, or we don't know, from a Wi-Fi perspective, she could use those security mechanisms. But the identity, her persona itself, and then that device that she's connecting to or connecting from, that's the security control. And so making sure that that is kind of locked down, as we typically say in the biz, is really important.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you mentioned at the beginning of that, right? And if we're doing this right, if we're doing our jobs right, Mary doesn't really know all of this. She doesn't need to know all of this. She just needs to get connected. Now, she may see some additional prompts, right? We talked about this a little bit last time, but for example, an additional MFA challenge, right? She's not connecting where we expect her to be from. She may still be able to get to where she wants to go, but we need another check, right? Things like that are okay, as long as she's not getting hit 15, 16 times in one day just to do her job, right? And that's the user lens side of this so then the other thing we want to touch into, and this kind of moves into, put Mary's hat back on, right? Maybe now she's in the afternoon, right? She's moving into some of this core productivity time. She's working with all kinds of apps. Let's shift our focus to the data and the application security side of things. Again, user persona lens, Mary doesn't need to know any more than she needs to know to get to where she wants to go. But how are we securing these applications? Let's start with applications first, kind of application security, posture management. What are we doing differently from our perspective to make sure that Mary can get to where she needs to go, but we're also securing the application, because there could be some risky things that she has access to?
I think it's honestly, Chris, I think, it's more important before we get to the application is to look to how she's accessing the application. So we got the user persona, we've got the device now. Now it's like, and that might have been the question you were asking me, so I apologize if I kind of danced around that, but how is she accessing those applications or the data itself? So, it's important to know who she is, what she's connecting with, from a device posture standpoint. Now it's like, how do we secure and have or monitor what she's connecting to the applications on or from? If she's on-prem again, good, we've got those security controls. Hopefully the network is segmented segmented enough to where there's visibility crossing between, and the important data or those important applications are within a particular IP segment. If she's connecting to a SaaS app, then that's a completely different conversation, because that SaaS app is hosted, in the cloud or something like that, or it's being serviced, from whether it's a Microsoft or a SAP or ServiceNow or something like that. And those security controls are very persona and workstation specific. Usually they'll have role-based access and those types of things enabled, so they know, obviously who it is, and they can grant access based off of that role. And then you start to think through, like, from an SD-WAN, instead of a VPN, where, that's where a lot of, when we have conversation with customers, they're using traditional VPNs and that kind of thing, which, at a time they were okay because you were only giving particular people access to particular IP subnets. But as the workforce became more dispersed, those types of things, third-party access, those challenges, VPN became problematic, because what you're doing is you're giving somebody access to the entire environment, and you're putting all of the onus on making sure that just their identity is correct. You have no visibility to anything else, IP subnets, those types of things. So it's really important to first understand, how she's connecting, or how, that persona is connecting to the applications, before we can really secure those applications themselves.
That's a good point. And to take a little rabbit trail for a minute, you mentioned third-party access. Right. In our kind of scenario here, we've always put Marketing Mary as a corporate employee, right? And so she's got a corporate managed device, maybe even a managed mobile device, whatever. That's not the case for a lot of organizations, right? Yeah. A lot of, especially smaller organizations or growing organizations, marketing, again, picking on marketing, but marketing may be an outsourced function, right? Absolutely. It may be completely third party. So from that perspective, Marketing Mary doesn't have a corporate device. She may or may not have our VPN client. A lot of what she's getting to is probably SaaS based, so it's not as critical in terms of letting people into the core network, so to speak. But at the same time, if third-party Marketing Mary can't get to where we want her to go, we're going to have contract problems, right? Mm-hmm. And access problems, and ultimately a bunch of headaches. So I think you hit on something critical there that does move into the application side a little bit of, when we need to manage the security aspects to our data stores, to our applications, to a device or a person that's not coming through a corporately owned path, for lack of a better term, that's a different conversation, right? And so I think we need to make sure that as we build those security controls at the application layer and at the data layer, we're taking the different postures into account. And to me, this goes right back into the persona conversation we started with. That Marketing Mary, external Marketing Mary, is a very different persona than an internal Marketing Mary. And so from an access perspective, especially on the surface, say like an Active Directory group or an Entra ID group that's managing SSO access, they may look exactly the same. Under the covers, we need to dig deeper. And beyond things like device posture, like we were just talking about. So I think there's a lot of layers to this, and that's part of the fun of this conversation.
Absolutely.
But it's pieces that aren't necessarily thought of holistically. So I think that's a really good point. I guess moving further, just as we continue down this journey, did you want to talk a little bit more from the data perspective and securing those data stores? I think that's probably a good next step here.
Yeah. Well, that's honestly, that's a huge conversation. And I think when we talk to customers and we try to partner and help with customers, I would say, good 80% of them, struggle with data and struggle with, data visibility and those types of things. And that's honestly, to go all the way back to the beginning, that's the flexibility of our approach is, you're really, in order for you to have visibility to your data and secure the data itself, you got to be able to know who's accessing it, putting controls around that data itself, whether it's an app in the cloud or it's an app on your in premise or those types of things. Making sure that there's visibility surrounding those applications is really imperative, from a network standpoint. Whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, you want to make sure that from From a traditional firewall standpoint, you have zone-to-zone communication, you have constant visibility of what's crossing zones, and then you can begin to put security controls around those zones. Whether it's IPS, IDS, those types of controls. When we start to get further into, the application security and data, the challenge that most customers, I feel, come up to is categorizing the data itself, whether it's a compliance constraint or, they just need ultimate visibility of not just who's accessing it, but what is the data itself. Does it contain credit card information? Does it contain PII? Those types of things. And what we see is a lot of customers, they get so overwhelmed by categorizing the data itself that they struggle with securing it, number one. And two, they usually take I would say an inefficient approach to categorizing it. So they'll just categorize a lot of things blanket versus being very specific, which is, number one, it's a little bit inefficient. Two, it's not cost effective because you have to store all of that information. And then it's very administrative and process heavy. And so then you start to get into, talent and, a lot of different discussions, which is a way different discussion than this. But, back to the basic foundational layer, who's accessing the data, what's their role, what role do they play, why are they accessing it, are they accessing it internal, external, whatever device, and then, from a connectivity standpoint, are we putting the right controls around the data or the application itself?
I think it's good to kind of land there too, and you mentioned it, right? We look at this approach through kind of those 5 pillars that we've been dancing around, but just to call them out, right? It's the identity, it's the device, it's the network, both their side and our side, the application or the target, and the data.
Correct.
Right? I mean, those 5 things have been the case forever. They're still the case. The pieces of them move. We're a lot more cloud-based than we are on-prem at this point, but that's still what we're talking about. And so from our perspective is this Loom lens approach we keep talking about, this user-centric, is yes, we need to check the security boxes, so to speak, but our users need to be able to do their jobs. And we're finding a lot of organizations, we've both worked at organizations that have had this challenge as well, that in an effort to be secure and an effort to be as robust as possible, people can't do their jobs, right? And so what that results in is people trying to find ways around the controls. Right. Absolutely. And there's enough information out there. Google is great, and Google can also get people in trouble, right? If people start looking for ways around controls because they're so tight or they're so inefficient, we've made a bigger problem. And so that's where we want to come back to from this user perspective, is making sure we're covering those bases. So I appreciate it.
I can tell a really quick story. Honestly, this is my wife. She works for she's a graphic artist for a printing plant, and I've often had conversations with her, about struggles she's had at work and stuff like that. And it's very similar to our use case from a marketing Mary. She's not in marketing, but as a graphic designer, her job is to be able to access those files or the data, to manipulate them and make them pretty for, different products that they do printing for. And that is her number one struggle, is being able to access the data specifically, whether it's latent because they have network connectivity constraints due to their architecture, or the file servers themselves aren't readily available, so it takes her time to find because they haven't categorized the stuff or put the right processes around the data. So it's very interesting to me. We talk through this methodology. I almost want to go in and be like, hey, deploy this, and
there are better options.
Yeah, your workers will be so much more efficient. It won't take her 20 minutes to access a particular file. So
yeah, that's a great example. And we've talked about this use case obviously a lot before, but I've not heard that story before. It's just ironic to me that we don't have to look very far to find these examples, right? And we've built this whole approach based on our conversations with customers, and it it seems simple, right? If I say it out loud, this seems very simple, but at the same time, it's challenging to get right, and we struggle to check all the boxes and still build a way that people can do their jobs, just given resource constraints, time constraints, and in some cases cost constraints. So there's a lot of components to it, but that's the fun part of the conversation for us. I think it can speak for both of us that sitting down and just let's go to the whiteboard, let's start at the beginning, and let's see where the gaps are. Every organization's at a different spot on this journey, and some have gaps in the identity space, some have gaps in the device space, others it's just on the data side. You just never know. But until you look at it holistically and build that inventory you were mentioning before, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know where the gaps are. So
absolutely. And again, with the flexibility of this, methodology or framework, outside of whether you have, identity concerns or connectivity concerns or constraints, bandwidth, whatever, or just data concerns, it could also go into the fact that, whether you have compliance needs and you're having problems, meeting compliance requirements, and then to tease our next conversation as we, jam or geek out on the next topic, to tease our next video is we can get into, what I say, not necessarily complex, but a lot of people will say it's complex when we start to talk about, AI and really get into, the application and DSPM, world. It's really funny when we start to talk about AI and those types of things, it's still back to the foundational layers. If you're doing, from a foundational approach, if you're, doing particular things for our, methodology, then AI is less, it's not as scary of a thing to approach.
Yeah, no, you're right. That'll be good. I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. So to all of you watching, thank you for hanging with us. This has been a fun conversation. There will be another part of this where we dive into some of those topics that Hutch just mentioned. So we look forward to seeing you again. And I appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.